I know what you're thinking. Stop hating Star Trek Nemesis? The film that crashed harder at the box office than when Enterprise met Scimitar? The one that killed off Data? The movie that pretty much ended the franchise for several painful years? Yeah, that one. But a bit of suspension of disbelief is never a bad thing. It's also been 20 years since its release, and that's a good amount of time for retrospect. We've equally had a lot of new Star Trek now to lessen the blow. It makes sense to go back and take another look at this much maligned movie, not merely with the benefit of hindsight, but equally for what it was at the time. Just a little bit more. With all that in mind, I'm Bree from Trek Culture, and here are 10 reasons to stop hating Star Trek Nemesis. Number 10. The gift of music. There is one thing that is undeniably great about Nemesis, and that's its soundtrack. The score was composed by the incomparable Jerry Goldsmith, a name synonymous with Star Trek, and was his last gift to the franchise before his death in 2004. In fact, it was the penultimate score that he wrote. Goldsmith's association with Star Trek goes back to the very beginning. The composer was Gene Roddenberry's first choice in the original series pilot, The Cage. But unfortunately, schedules didn't quite work out. Of course, we all know that Goldsmith went on to write the majestic, Oscar-nominated score for the motion picture, the epic main title theme of which was reused for The Next Generation. He also wrote the score for Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek Insurrection, and the theme for Voyager. The music of Nemesis imposes its mark from the very beginning. The piece, simply titled Remus, manages to instill just the right amount of tension and foreboding in the audience before a single word is uttered. The rest of the score is as skillful as you would expect from the genius mind of Goldsmith. Number 9. The Battle of the Basin Rift. Picard's quotation in Stellar Cartography is all the more apt as the Enterprise E and crew enter the Basin Rift, but through a glass darkly. For what precedes is a battle of biblical proportions. The Scimitar has already rightly been described as a predator, which can bear its teeth of 52 pulse disruptor cannons, 27 photon torpedo launchers, and the gargoyle-inducing Thalaron weapon. Yeah, you can argue that the entire sequence is overly long, and then there's the whole Riker Viceroy thing, but come on. It's pretty damn cool as battles go, and the visuals hold up rather well to this day. In-universe, this battle, after the aid given to the Enterprise by the Romulans to defeat Shinzon, sparked new hopes of peace between the Federation and the Empire. The Titan, captained by Riker, was set to head to the first round of talks. This all changed, however, when it was discovered that the Romulan sun was soon about to go supernova, and indeed did in 2387. This of course became a huge focus for Star Trek Picard Season 1. The Basin Rift sequence was intended to be grander, as John Logan's script called for a whole fleet of ships to fight the Scimitar. Budgetary concerns meant that these ambitions had to be scaled back to what we ended up with in the movie. Nonetheless, it still ranks high in the history of epic Star Trek space battles. Number 8. It's only Admiral Bloody Janeway. Who didn't stifle a gasp when this former captain popped up on Jean-Luc's little LCD display? It was certainly the briefest of surprise cameos for the now Vice Admiral, but nonetheless crucial as it was she who ordered the Enterprise to Romulus, setting the movie in motion. Having let her hair down a bit on the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Janeway has gone back to the Bob, but still allows herself a moment of humor with Picard before getting down to business. Speaking to Den of Geek in 2022, Kate Mulgrew revealed that her contribution to the film was shot immediately after Voyager, if not in the final week of Voyager, and that she was alone in the studio on the soundstage. While fans didn't know it at the time, this quick bit of post-Endgame direct-to-camera work would become the last time that we see Mulgrew in her role for almost 20 years. That's reason enough to have cherished Nemesis more than we have. Technically speaking, however, if you've been to Las Vegas circa 2004, you could have seen Mulgrew as Admiral Janeway in Borg Invasion 4D at the Star Trek Experience. But her on-screen return would only come at the phenomenal Star Trek Prodigy, which is set about 4 years after the events of Nemesis. Number 7. Who doesn't love a good wedding and other deleted scenes? Perhaps you were rightly a little disappointed if you paid for a cinema ticket in 2002. It's the deleted DVD scenes that you really needed to properly appreciate Star Trek Nemesis. You may also have the same affinity for weddings as Worf after downing his body weight in Romulan ale. Wesley, at least, seemed to be enjoying himself at the Troy Riker shindig in scenes that never made it to theaters. There was a heavy-handedness in the edit for Nemesis. A lot of material got chopped, nearly 50 minutes in total. Among the lighter, let's prank the new first officer, and about time health and safety moments, we got a lot more meaningful character development in the deleted scenes than we arguably did in the end product. Most of this would have drastically improved the quality of the movie. The seatbelt scene would probably have made for a better ending. The clipping of Data and Jean-Luc musing about life and death over a glass of Chateau Picard would have been a nice bit of foreshadowing, and we could have even seen Data trying to teach B4 some of the basics of table manners. In another moment of nostalgia mixed with heartache, we would have been treated to various throwbacks from the series, including Spot, as Geordi and Worf sorted through Data's quarters. We can only hope that eventually there will be some sort of Nemesis extended cut so that we can enjoy these scenes and the film fully. Number 6. Tom Hardy. A relative unknown when he was cast in Nemesis, Tom Hardy has gone to reach the dizzying heights of Hollywood superstardom, and deservedly so. The young and then relatively inexperienced actor delivered a powerhouse performance as Praetor Shinzon, holding his own as he goes line for line with acting royalty Patrick Stewart. Few others would have suited the role so well, and plenty auditioned or were considered, including Jude Law, Michael Shanks, and James Marsters. In an interview for ET Inside, Patrick Stewart revealed that Tom Hardy was suggested to him by a friend and former agent as just the man for the role. Hardy was filming in Morocco at the time and, again, according to Stewart, taped himself for the role of Shinzon naked and essentially improvising, a fact that made everyone sit up. Hardy's screen test with Stewart is available on YouTube. Placed side by side in the clip with the actual scenes in the Romulan Senate, it highlights the magnificent nuance of Hardy's menacing portrayal of the deceptive and hate-filled Shinzon. In interviews from the time, Hardy speaks with genuine pride about the role for which he watched all of The Next Generation and the films to prepare. The role was to be the big break for the actor, and he clearly expresses his desire to do further Trek. Sadly, the film's poor performance at the box office and fans' backlash took a significant toll on Hardy's mental health, from which it took some time to recover. Number 5. It didn't suck as much as Insurrection. During a DragonCon panel with LeVar Burton and Marina Sirtis in 2005, the host began to ask the somewhat pointed question, the movie Nemesis did not do as well in the box office as it had hoped to do, but before he could finish, the delightfully frank Burton replied, because it sucked. Audible gasps were heard from the audience before the equally honest Sirtis replied, it didn't suck as much as Insurrection, adding, I fell asleep at the premiere of Insurrection. Perhaps there is some merit to Sirtis's reasoning. Whatever the faults of Nemesis are, it would certainly be difficult to reproach the film for its lack of imagination. Its cinematic scope and pacing do arguably manage to keep the audience's attention throughout. Whatever you thought about the quality and quantity of those scenes, it's doubtful you fell asleep over your popcorn during them. By comparison, Insurrection does feel markedly more soporific with its middling, low-stakes plot and lack of momentum, especially during those slow-mo moments. Nemesis might well have had a zany story, but at least it has a story, and one that has galactic implications to warrant a big screen outing. Number 4. Don't blame it on the screenwriter. Before penning the screenplay for Nemesis, writer John Logan was already an Academy Award nominee for the film Gladiator. He went on to co-write such films as The Aviator, Skyfall, Spectre, and created and co-wrote the brilliant TV series Penny Dreadful, continuing to pick up awards nods along the way. For Nemesis, he also shared writing credits with Rick Berman and Brent Spiner. Logan's script was also leaked onto the internet months prior to release. The film and Logan were then ripped apart by anyone with a keyboard before it even got to the cinema. Who knows how this might have affected the box office performance had that not happened? The fault, dear viewer, is not in the Star Trek. It's clear that members of the cast don't blame Logan for the film's failure in any case. As LeVar Burton put it, John Logan is an A+ writer in Hollywood, phenomenal writer, and is a fan of Star Trek. I don't think the failure of that movie to deliver to the audience what we promised them was John Logan's fault. Indeed, Logan is a huge Star Trek fan, and his script, especially if you go back and watch the deleted scenes as previously discussed, clearly show his love for and detailed knowledge of the franchise. If Logan wasn't to blame, both Burton and Marina Sirtis had a clear idea of who was. Number 3. Blame it on Baird? In another candid moment from the DragonCon panel, LeVar Burton was asked, well, what went wrong? His answer, with little hesitation, was the director. LeVar had an apparent valid personal reason to take umbrage since, as he went on to say, for the first 6 weeks the director kept calling me Laverne, and apparently thought Geordi was an alien. In terms of familiarity with the material, both Burton and Sirtis then stated that Baird knew nothing and didn't even watch a single episode of Next Gen, which, as Sirtis pointed out, is problematic for the lore-dependent, relationship-interdependent Star Trek franchise. About 10 years later, at the 2014 Star Trek Destination Convention in London, the TNG cast were asked about the end of an era moment that was Nemesis. Michael Dorn replied that it was a tough shoot, before Sirtis quickly added, "Oh, come on, say it, the director was an idiot." Others have been critical of Baird in the past. Star Trek production designer Herman Zimmerman once called him impossible to work with, as nothing satisfied him. In Baird's defense, he was already an established and Oscar-nominated film editor and director by the time he got the job on Nemesis. Producers made the conscious decision to hire him despite his lack of knowledge of Star Trek, and, as Baird put it in an interview for the BBC, "I took it very seriously to give you 2 hours of entertainment with thrills, spills, emotion, and humor." Number 2. Blame it on the box office. Even over the years, the critical response to Star Trek Nemesis hasn't become any more favorable. It is still spoiled fruit on that one website with only 38% to work with. Even the best of films have bombed the box office, only to garner praise later down the line. While this is never going to be the case for Nemesis, it is still worth taking a look at some of the reasons for its box office failure that might temper the ill will surrounding that little franchise hiatus. In its theatrical run, according to Box Office Mojo, Nemesis made a domestic US gross of just over $43 million and an international gross of just over $24 million on a budget of $60 million. This makes it the worst performing Star Trek film of them all, and it ultimately turned in a loss for Paramount. Its US opening weekend was so catastrophic that it was even beaten by Jennifer Lopez's Made in Manhattan, also with a Rotten Tomato of 38%. Any plans for a follow-up film aboard the Titan were definitively scrapped. If you look more closely, however, you see that Nemesis was up against juggernauts the likes of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and Die Another Day. It also opened in far fewer cinemas than JLo's offering. According to Trek Movie, very little was spent on the marketing and ads for Nemesis in the US, save for a few smatterings of action figures, trading cards, Del Taco, and Safeway promotions, and a novelization, of course. The film was not even advertised in most US retail stores. It's perhaps little wonder, therefore, that the box office performance was so poor. Number 1. Before, later data. Nemesis has had a bit of a renaissance lately. With the return of Jean-Luc to the small screen, it became pretty much required viewing if you wanted to fully understand what Star Trek Picard Season 1, set 20 years after the events of the film, was really about. Data, his death, other androids, synths, and the Romulans. Even 2 decades later, what happened back then clearly still haunts Picard. In particular, the manner of Data's death. That tyrannical marionette who was all set to become the stickler for rules first officer of the Enterprise E before his death is not only the crux of the plot of Star Trek Picard Season 1, but returns to get a proper send-off, sort of, via the B4 download and fractal neuronic cloning. Interestingly enough, 7 of 9, also key to Picard, was set for a significant role in Nemesis, but Jeri Ryan turned down the offer as she felt the character had been shoehorned in. Nemesis is also key to the world of Star Trek Lower Decks, the timeline for which begins only a year after Shinzon's defeat. Star Trek Prodigy picks up the mantle from Nemesis and briefly features the ongoing negotiations with the Romulans and the Neutral Zone. Nemesis also deserves a bit of reappraisal in the context of the 3rd and final season of Star Trek Picard. The main cast of The Next Generation are making their big return. This is the first time we've seen them all together since 2002. In theory, we get a degree of closure for the characters that Nemesis was unable to provide. Nemesis was never meant to be the end for The Next Generation, hence the lack of finality. After all, this was no TNG's Undiscovered Country. And those were 10 reasons to stop hating Star Trek Nemesis. If you liked this video, go ahead and leave it a thumbs up, or tell us how much you hate Nemesis in the comments below. If you want to keep up to date with all our videos, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. If you want to find us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at TrekCulture or Instagram at TrekCultureYT. You can also find me on social media by simply searching Trekkie Bree. Until next time, don't forget to live long and prosper.